Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this nebula water animation loop here. We're going to be using a combination of matte painting and 3D elements to help sell the scene. It should be relatively light on your computer power and the frames shouldn't take too long to render. So without further ado, let's get to it. Open up Blender. I'm going to go to Edit, Preferences, and under Add-ons we're going to search for Node and then enable the Node Wrangler here. Once you've done that, click this button, click Save Preferences, and that will ensure the Node Wrangler loads every time you load Blender. I'll then take my cursor to the bottom left of the 3D viewport until I see a crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag up and open up a new window. I'll then change this from the 3D viewport to the timeline. I'll take my cursor to the bottom left of the 3D viewport until I see a crosshair again. I'll left click and drag up and open up a new window. I'll then change this from the 3D viewport to the shader editor. In the shader editor, I'm going to hit N to hide the end panel, and in my timeline, I'm also going to hit N to hide the end panel. You won't have this node here. This is from a previous tutorial. So I'll just select that node group. I'm going to hit delete. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to select the default cube. I'm going to hit delete. I'll select the default lamp. I'm also going to hit delete. Over here on my render tab, I'm going to change this from Eevee to cycles. Under sampling, I'm going to set the max samples to, let's say, 1024. I'll keep the noise threshold set to 0.01. Under lights, I'm going to deactivate light tree. Under light paths, I'm going to reduce the diffuse and glossy bounces to 2. Ensure that your transparency is set to 8. I'm going to scroll down and I'll deactivate reflective and refractive caustics. I'll then go to my output tab up here and I'm going to change my frame rate from 24 FPS to 30 FPS. I'll also enable render regions, and that will just ensure that only the camera view is rendered. To make this scene, we're going to be using a few assets which I've prepared. I'll make these assets available on my Patreon. For this tutorial, I'm going to choose 3 random images from this selection here. These 5 EXRs are also renders of nebulas, just in a different style. And of course, we got phases of the moon and Mars, as well as some renders of stars. So you can mix and match these all you like, but for me, I'm just going to choose 3 images from this selection here. I'll leave a link in the description where you can download this from Patreon for free. So once you've downloaded that and extracted the file, I'm just going to set my camera up. So I'll select my camera. I'm going to navigate to my Object Data tab over here. And for the X, Y, and Z location, I'm going to type in 0. For the X rotation, I'm going to type in 90. And for the Z location, I'm going to type in 0. I'll then navigate to my camera data tab over here. And I'm going to change the focal length to, let's say, 24mm. That should do for now. I'll then hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go Image, and I'm going to choose Mesh Plane. Navigate to the asset folder that you downloaded from my Patreon. I'm going to select this one. You don't have to use this one. You can use any image to keep it unique to your scene. I'll then select Import Image as Planes. I'll then navigate to my Object Data tab over here, and for the Y location, I'm going to type in 10 meters. I'll just orbit round in my 3D viewport, and with that image plane selected, I'm going to hit numpad period, and that will zoom into the object. I'll then navigate into Material Preview. I'm going to increase my shader editor window. I'm going to select the Principal BSDF. I'm going to hit Delete. I'm going to select the Nebula texture. I'll just hit G and give us a bit more space over here. I'll then connect this color socket into the surface socket of the material output. Shift A, I'm going to go shader, and I'm going to choose mix shader, and I'll pop that in between the nebula and the material output. Shift A, shader, and we choose transparent, and I'll pop that down here. I'll then connect the transparent node into the bottom socket of the mix shader node. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go color, and we'll choose hue saturation value, and I'll pop that in between there. Shift A, we go converter, and we choose math. We'll change this from add to multiply. I'll then plug the colour from the nebula into the top socket of the multiply node, and this will convert it to black and white. I'll then connect this value into the factor of the mix shader. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go converter, and we choose colour ramp, and I'll pop that in between the multiply node and the factor of the mix shader, and I'll just drag this down to here. On the colour ramp, I'm going to change the interpolation type from linear to B-spline. I'll click this arrow here, and I'll choose flip colour ramp. And now, if I drag this black flag across, you can see it's bringing in more of the image. So I'm going to bring it to round about there. In fact, for me to see this properly, I'm just going to go into rendered view up here. I'll also navigate to my world tab over here, and I'm going to bring the strength down to 0. And on my color ramp with this black flag, I'm going to set this to 0.03. I'll just increase my 3D viewport. I'll navigate into solid view. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate. I'm going to right click so it clicks back in its original position. I'll then navigate to my Object Data tab over here, and I'm going to change the Y location to 20 meters. Before making this a unique material, I'm just going to rename this material to Nebula, and with this second plane selected, I'm going to click this 2 button. You might have a different number here. depending on how many material slots are already used. So I'll click this button here, and that will make this a unique material. I'll then rename this to Nebula 2. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit numpad period, and that will zoom into that object. I'll just increase this window. I'll then navigate to the Nebula image texture. I'm going to click this cross button, and that will delete the image texture from the node. I'll click open, navigate to your assets folder, which you downloaded from my Patreon. Select another random image. Again, you don't have to choose the same one as me, and then click open image. So now we've got two different images on both of these planes. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate. I'll right click so it goes back into its original position, and under the object data tab over here, I'm going to set the Y location to 30 meters. In my 3D viewport, again, I'm going to hit numpad period to zoom into that object. And in my shader editor, I'm going to click this number 2 here. Again, you might have a different number depending on how many material slots you have, and that will make it a unique material. And I'll rename this to Nebula 3. And on the image texture node, I'm going to click this cross button to delete the texture. I'll click open, navigate to your assets folder, select another random image texture. I'm going to go for this one. I'll then click open image. I'll just increase my 3D viewport. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. And in your outliner, with this bottom nebula selected, which is the furthest one away, so hit numpad 0. I'm going to hit S to scale that up until it encompasses the camera view. And I'm going to scale it up a bit more, just so we've got quite a bit of overlap, because eventually we're going to animate the camera, and we don't want the camera to go out of bounds. In my outliner, I'm going to select the next nebula up in the list, which is the middle one. I'll then hit S to scale, and I'll bring this up to around about the same size. I'll do the same for the top nebula. So this is the one closest to the camera. I'm going to hit S, bring this up to around about there. And now I'm just going to go into viewport shading. Okay, it's looking reasonably good so far, so I'll navigate into material preview. It's going to exit out of camera view. I'm going to move my camera around, and you can see this parallax effect it's having. Okay, it's looking reasonably good so far. I'm just going to navigate into solid view. I'll just orbit round. So next up, I think I'm going to add the water plane. So in my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go mesh, and I'm going to choose plane. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit S40 and hit enter, and that will scale it up by 40. Tab out of edit mode. In my outliner, I'm going to rename this object to water. In my shader editor, I'm going to click new, and I'll rename this material to water. On the principal BSDF, I'm going to change it to 100% metallic, and I'll set the roughness to 0.025. In my outliner, I'm going to select my camera object. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll then toggle on wireframe view. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit numpad period to zoom into that object. I'm going to hit G, Z, hold down control to snap your camera to the grid, and I'm going to bring it up 1 meter. From here, I'm going to hold down shift and select the water plane. I'm going to zoom out a bit. I'll then hit G for grab, Z to lock it on the Z axis, hold down control to snap it in increments, and I'm going to bring it down to round about there, just so the water plane lands above the bottom of this smallest nebula image texture. I'm going to hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. Before you move on, it's a good idea to save your project. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save my project as like and subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. And then click Save As. Let's crack on with the water material. I'm just going to navigate into material preview. I'm going to mute my nebulas. In the shader editor, I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to add texture, and we go to noise texture. I'm going to change it from 3D to 4D. I'll set the scale to 1. I'm going to keep the detail at 2, the roughness at 0.5, and the distortion I'm going to set to 0.2. Shift A, we go to vector, and we choose bump. I'm going to plug the colour from the noise texture into the height of the bump node, and the normal socket from the bump node into the normal socket of the principal BSDF. I'll increase the distance to 0.25. I'll then increase the scale on my noise texture to 50. Maybe we can bump it up to 75. To animate the water, we're going to animate this W factor here, but I also want the water to loop on frame 480. So before we continue making this looping system with the noise textures, I'm just going to go to my timeline, and I'm going to change the M frame to 480. You can set this value to whatever you like, so you can have it longer or shorter. Maybe I'll increase my shader editor a little bit more. I'll also decrease this window just to give us a bit more room. I'm going to take this noise texture, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop it down here. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go color, and I'm going to choose mix color, and I'll pop that in between this noise texture and the bump node. I'll then connect this color socket into socket B of the mix color node. Maybe I'll just give us a bit more room. Shift A, we go converter, and we choose math. I'll pop that down here. I'm going to change it from add to divide. I'll then connect this value into the factor of the mixed color node. Shift A, converter, we choose math. I'll pop that up here. I'll change it from add to multiply. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop this down here. Shift D to duplicate, I'll pop this here. I'll change this from multiply to subtract. Shift D, I'll pop this over here. We'll change it from subtract to divide. Shift D, and I'll pop this up here, and we'll change it from divide to floored modulo. So every time I add a node, the material view is lagging, so it's taking a bit of time to rasterize. So I'm just going to go into solid view. So now we're going to connect all of these nodes together, and when the system's built, I'll explain how it works. So I'm going to take this value from this multiply node and plug it into the W factor of this noise texture. I'll do the same for this value and plug it into the W factor of this noise texture. I'm going to connect this subtract node into the top socket of this multiply node. I'm going to take this floored modulo and plug it into the top socket of this multiply node. I'll then take the value from the floored modulo and plug it into the top socket of this subtract node. I'll then take the floored modulo and plug it into the top socket of this divide node. I'll then hold down shift, right click and drag through these three noodles, and that will create a control point. I'm going to hit G, just bring this across over to here. I'll then hold down shift, right click and drag through this noodle. I'm going to hit G, just bring this down to around about here. In fact, I'm going to take a control point from here and drag this noodle into the top socket of this divide node. I'm going to hold down shift, right click and drag through this noodle. I'm going to hit G, just bring this across over to here. And maybe I'll hold down shift, right click and drag through here. I'm going to hit G, bring this across over to here. And I'm just going to drag this node up to here. I'll then box select these three control points. I'm going to hit S, X, 0. And that will ensure that they all line up. Maybe I'll box select this one. I'm going to hit G, Y, just bring this down. So with this divide node, I'm going to connect this to the bottom socket of this multiply node, and I'll also connect it to the bottom socket of this multiply node. I'm going to hold down shift, right click and drag through these two noodles. Just hit G, hold down shift, right click and drag through this noodle. I'm going to hit G, just bring this down. And the only point of adding these control points is so we can see exactly where the noodles are going. I'll hold down shift, right click and drag, hit G. I'll then box select these three control points here. I'm going to hit SX0. Hit enter, and I'm going to hit G, X, and just bring these across over to here. So now we need to add three value nodes. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go input, and we'll choose value, and I'll pop that up here. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate, I'll pop that there. Shift D to duplicate one more time, and I'll pop that there. For this top value node, I'm going to hit F2, and I'm going to rename it to hash frame. So this is where we'll add a driver. For this value node, I'm going to hit F2, and I'll rename it to speed. I'll then select this value node, I'll hit F2 and we'll rename it to loop frame. So for these three value nodes, this loop frame, this is going to be your end frame. So for me, I've got 480 frames. So in here, I'm going to type in 480. For the speed, I'm going to set this to 1. Just for now, we can change this a bit later. And for this node here, where it says hash frame, this is where we're going to input the driver. So in here, I'm going to type in hash frame, hit enter. And now we've added a driver. And what this driver will do is if I hit play, you can see that the number count increases as the timeline increases. So if I go to frame 110, you can see it counts to 110, skip one frame, 111, and so on and so forth. So I'll just skip back to frame 1. We'll connect this frame value into the top socket of the floored modulo. I'll just drag this across over to here. I'll bring this over to here. And for the speed, I'm going to connect this to the top socket of this divide node. And I'm going to increase the value to, let's say, 100. So we're going to divide it by 100. And for this loop frame, I'm going to connect this to the bottom socket of the floored modulo. I'll also connect it to the bottom socket of this subtract node. And finally, I'll connect it to the bottom socket of this divide node over here. I'm going to hold down shift, right click and drag across this noodle. I'm going to hit G, just bring this across over to around about there. I'll do the same for this one. Hold down shift, right click and drag, G, bring this up to round about there. I'll then box select these two control points. I'm going to hit SX0, GX, just bring these over to round about there, just to tidy everything up. I'll navigate into material preview. I'm going to increase my 3D viewport. I'm going to hit Control S to save, just in case we have any crashes. Now, if I hit play, you can see that the water's moving way too fast. So maybe I can reduce the speed to, let's say, 0.05. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, it's still a bit fast for my liking, so I'm going to set this to 0.03. I'll just hit play. Okay, that looks good. Now, if I take my timeline near the end, when I hit play and the animation goes towards the end and then restarts, you should see that the water loops seamlessly. So I'm just going to hit play. and you'll see that there's no break. Should be a seamless motion. Excellent. And I'll explain why this is happening. So I'll just increase my shader editor. What floored modulo does, let me just disconnect this node here. If I was to set this value to 30, for example, so essentially what this floored modulo is doing is counting from 0 to 30, 0 to 30, 0 to 30, every 30 frames on my timeline. And that's driving the W factor of this noise texture. So the W factor is going from 0 to 30, 0 to 30, and so on. But because we've plugged this floored modulo into this subtract node for this noise texture, instead of going from 0 to 30, the W factor on this noise texture is going from 30 to 0, 30 to 0, and so on. We can then divide the inverse W factors with this divide node, which is divided by the floored modulo over here and the original loop frame. In my case, it's 480, and the output of this divide is known as a ping pong crossfade, which is the mix factor between the two inverse W factors here. Obviously, going from 0 to 30 or 30 to 0 on these W factors here is going to be way too fast, so we added this divide node and this speed controller to slow down the animation to make it more manageable, and essentially that's how this system works. I'm just going to reconnect this loop frame into the bottom socket of this floored modulo. I think we should give these nodes some colour so we can easily identify them as controllers later on. So I'm just going to hit N to open up the N panel. I'm going to select this node here. I'm going to hit colour. I'll then expand these options and I'm going to choose a custom colour, maybe something around there perhaps. I'll then hover my cursor over that colour swatch. I'm going to hit Ctrl C to copy. I'll then select this node. I'm going to enable colour, and over the colour swatch I'm going to hit Ctrl V to paste that colour. I'll then select this node here. I'm going to do the same, enable colour, and then Ctrl V. So now we know these are the controllers. I'll just hit N to hide the N panel. I'm going to hit Ctrl S to save my project. Moving forward, we need to keep the values of these noise textures exactly the same, otherwise the illusion is lost. So I'm just going to add a couple more value nodes to control these elements, and that will unify the system. So I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go Input, and I'm going to choose Value. I'll pop that up here. I'm going to duplicate this 3 times. So now we've got 4 value nodes. For this top value node here, I'm going to hit F2 and I'm going to rename it to Noise Scale. For this next value node, I'm going to hit F2 and I'm going to rename it to Noise Detail. For this next value node, I'm going to hit F2 and I'm going to rename it to Noise Roughness. And for the last value node, I'm going to hit F2 and I'm going to rename it to Noise Distortion. So for the noise scale, I'm going to set this to 75 because it's 75 on our noise texture. For the noise detail, I'm going to set this to 2. For noise roughness, I'm going to set to 0.5. And for the noise distortion, I'm going to set to 0.2. And now all of these values in these nodes here correlate to the same values which are in these noise texture nodes here. So I can connect the noise scale to the scale in the noise textures. I'll then connect the noise detail to the detail sockets of the noise textures. I'll connect the noise roughness into the roughness sockets of the noise textures. I'll then connect the noise distortion into the distortion sockets of the noise textures. And because these value nodes are controllers for the noise textures, I'm also going to give these a custom color. I'll hit N to open up the N panel. I'll select this top one. I'll then navigate to the N panel and this nose tab here and enable color. And I'm going to change this to maybe like a green color, something around there. I'll then hover my cursor over the color swatch. I'm going to hit Ctrl C to copy that color. I'll select this one. I'll then enable color. I'm going to hit Ctrl V. I'll select this one, enable color. I'm going to hit Ctrl V and I'll do the same for this one. I'll then hit N to hide the N panel. I'm going to box select all of these nodes. I'm going to hit F to add a frame, F2, and I'll rename the frame to Noise Loop System. I'll hit Enter. Now that you've created this loop noise system, you can use this for any project in Blender. You're not restricted to using this for just water. This can be used for various different use cases, especially in motion graphics. So I'm just going to zoom out. I'm going to increase my 3D viewport. I'll then hit Ctrl S to save the project. I'm just going to hit play just to see if the water texture is moving as I want it. Okay, that will do for now. I'm happy with that. Of course, you can adjust any of the values. So we've got the noise scale, the noise detail, noise roughness, noise distortion. You can change the speed and the loop frame. So for example, we could loop the animation on frame 30 and then I'll change my end frame to frame 30. I'll then hit play and it will just continuously loop over 30 frames. I'm going to set mine back to 480 and I'll change my loop frame to 480. So I think from here I want to animate my camera. I'll just increase this window here. I'm going to select my camera. I'll then take my cursor to the shader editor. I'm going to click this button here and I'll change it from the shader editor to the graph editor. I'll just increase this window. I'm going to skip back to frame 1, and with my camera object selected, I'm going to go to my object data tab over here. I'm going to add keyframes on the X and Z location. I'll also add keyframes on the X, Y and Z rotation. I'll then take my cursor into the graph editor. I'll expand the camera action, expand the object transform. I'm going to select the X location keyframe. I'll then navigate to my N panel over here. I'm going to click this modifier tab. I'll click add modifier and I'll select noise. I'll just increase this window. I'm going to set the scale to, let's say, 100. I'll then enable restrict frame range. I'll expand these options. So for me, I'm going to start on frame 1. I'm going to end on frame 480 because I've got 480 frames in my scene. I'll then blend in over 60 frames and blend out over 60 frames. I'm just going to click this normalize button so we can see everything in the view. Okay, I'm going to hit play to see what we've got. Okay, the camera's not moving that much, so I'm going to change the strength on my noise modifier to 5. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm just going to skip back to frame 1. I'm going to go to my modifiers. I'm going to click this button here, and that will copy the modifier. I'll then navigate to the Z location keyframe. I'm going to navigate to the modifiers. I'm going to click this button, and that will paste the modifier in there. I'm going to change the offset to, let's say, 500, and that will give it a different noise pattern. The movement for the Z location is probably going to be a bit harsh. We don't want it to go below the water. Yep, that's way too harsh. So I'm going to take the strength down to, let's say, 1. Okay, I'm going to skip back to frame 1. I'll then select the X rotation keyframe. I'm going to go over to my modifiers. I'm going to click paste. I'm going to change the offset to, let's say, 1000. And I'm going to decrease the strength to, let's say, 0.1. I'll then navigate to the Y rotation keyframe. I'll navigate to my modifiers. I'm going to click paste. And I'm going to change the offset to, let's say, 1500. I'll also decrease the strength to 0.1. I'll then navigate to the Z rotation. I'll go back to my modifiers. I'm going to click paste. I'll reduce the strength to 0.1 and I'll change the offset to 2000. So now they've all got different seeds. I'll just hit play just to see what we've got. Okay, I think we can increase the strength on the rotations to, let's say, 0.2. I'll just hover my cursor over that value. I'm going to hit Control C to copy the value. I'll then select the Y rotation. And for the strength, I'm going to hit Control V to paste that 0.2 value in there. I'll do the same for X, and I hit Control V to paste. I'll just hit play just to preview what we've got. Okay, it's looking quite good. I want the X, Y and Z rotation to be a bit more dynamic. So with your X rotation selected, navigate to your noise modifier, and where it says depth, we're going to increase this to 1. I'll then select the Y rotation, go to your modifier, increase the depth to 1, and we'll do the same for the Z rotation. Select your Z rotation, go to the depth and set this to 1. And now if you hit play, you should see that the rotation is a bit more dynamic. It's almost like you're floating on the water. Excellent. Skip back to frame 1. I'll then navigate to my outliner and re-enable the 3 nebulas. I'm going to go into rendered view. I'll ensure that I've got my camera selected. I'm going to go to my camera settings over here. And for the tilt shift, I'm going to increase the Y to, let's say, around about there. I'll then go into solid view. I'm now going to scrub my timeline and ensure that the camera doesn't bleed out of these image planes here. So I'll select my camera. I'm going to scrub my timeline. Okay, it's not going out of view. Excellent. It comes close to it. Like here. It's coming very close to going out of view. Maybe I can select this bottom nebula in my outliner. I'll hit G, Z, and I'm going to bring this up to round about there. I'll select the next one up. G, Z, bring this up to round about there. And from here, I'm just going to scrub my timeline one more time, just to ensure that nothing's bleeding out. Excellent. It's looking good. I'll just hit Control S to save the project. I'll navigate to the graph editor, and I'm going to change it to the shader editor. I'm going to hit Shift C just to center my cursor to the world. I'll hit Shift A, and I'm going to go Mesh, and I'm going to choose Icosphere. I'll hit numpad period to zoom into that object. Right click and choose Shade Smooth. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll navigate into wireframe view. G, Z, hold down Control, snap it to the grid, and we'll just bring this down out of the way so it's below the water. Navigate into solid view. So you can see that that object is below the water, so we can't see it. In the shader editor, I'm going to click new to add a new material, and we'll rename the material to particle. I'm going to zoom in I'm going to delete the principal BSDF. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go shader and we'll choose emission. I'll pop that there. I'll just change this to an orange colour for now. And I'll set the strength to, let's say, 10. I'll then connect the emission socket into the surface socket of the material output. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go mesh and we'll choose cube. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll navigate into wireframe view. Tab into edit mode. Make sure you've got all the vertices selected. I'm going to hit G, Z, hold down control, snap it to the grid. And we're just going to drag this up to the base of the plane is in line with the origin. I'll then tab out of edit mode. I'll then hit G, Z, hold down control, snap it to the grid. And I'm going to bring the cube down so it's level with the water plane, which is here. I'll then hit S10, hit enter. Numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm just going to hit S, hold down control, snap it to the grid. And I'm going to bring it up to round about there. I'll then hit S, X, hold down control, snap it to the grid, and I'll bring it out to round about there. I hit numpad 3 to go into side view. I'm going to hit G, Y, hold down control, snap it to the grid, and I'm going to bring it down to round about there. So it's at the 20 meter mark. I'll hit S, Y, hold down control, snap it to the grid, and I'm going to bring it to round about there. I'll just hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to go into wireframe view. Okay, that's looking quite good. I'll just go into solid view. I'll navigate to my outliner and I'll rename the cube to particle system. And in my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit Control A and we're going to apply the scale. I'll then navigate to the particle tabs over here. I'll then click the plus button and that will add a new particle system. I'm going to set the particle count to 2,500. So the frame start, frame end in lifetime. Look at this as spawning. So for the frame start, I want all of the particles to spawn on frame 0. I want them to stop spawning on frame 0. So 2,500 particles will be spawned on frame 0. And then I want them to last 481 frames. So that's the duration of my timeline, plus 1. For the source, I want them to emit from the volume. And for velocity, I don't want them to have any velocity, so I'll set the normal to 0. Under physics, I don't want them to have any physics, so I'm going to set this to none. Under render, we want to render an object, and that object was the icosphere. I don't want to show the cube in the render, so I'm going to deselect show emitter. I'll then go to viewport display and I'll disable show emitter. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. We can see the particles here. Currently, all the particles have the same scale, so I'll navigate to my particle system and under render, where it says scale randomness, I'm going to set this to 0.9. I'll then scroll down and then expand field weights, and I'll disable gravity and all. So now if I hit play, all the particles should stay where they are, but I can hit G and grab this and move the particles around. Excellent. I'll just right click that back in place. So essentially what we're going to do is animate this. So I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into camera view. Now we want these particles to loop, and to achieve that I'm just going to create a duplicate. So I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll just navigate into wireframe view. I'll then hit Alt D and that will create an instance of that particle system. I'll hit Z and that will constrain it to the Z axis. I'm going to hold down Control to snap it to the grid, and I'm going to bring this down until the top of this cube is in line with the water plane, which is this, and that's also in line with the base of this cube. I'll then select this second particle system. I'm going to hit Shift S and we'll choose cursor to selected, and that will place the cursor at the base origin of this particle system. I'll then hit Shift A, we'll go to empty and we'll choose sphere. I'll then navigate to the empty settings over here. I'm going to increase the size of this to, let's say, 5, just so we can see it. In the outliner, I'm going to rename this empty to empty particle controller. I'll then go to my 3D viewport. I'll left click select the first particle system. I'm going to hold down Shift, left click select the second particle system, hold down Shift, left click select the empty object. I'll then hit Control P and we'll choose Object, Keep Transform. So essentially we've basically parented both of these particle systems to this controller. So now with this controller selected, if I hit G, you can see that the particle systems are moving with the controller. So now all we have to do is animate this controller. So with this controller selected, I'm going to go to my Object Data tab over here, and now we can animate this Z location, but we have to make sure that we're on frame 1 on your timeline. And with the Z location, we're going to add a keyframe here. I'll then skip to the last frame. I'm going to skip one more frame, so I'm on frame 481. And now all we have to do is grab this empty object so it's in line with this water plane here. So in my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit G, Z, hold down Control, and I'll bring the empty all the way up until it's in line with the water plane. I'll then navigate to the Object Data tab over here, and I'll add a keyframe there. By default, the animation interpolation type is set to Bezier. and that means the animation will start off slow, it will speed up, and then it will slow down towards the end. In fact, if I open up the graph editor, you should be able to see that effect. I've actually set my defaults to linear, but by default yours will be set to Bezier, and you don't really want this curve. So what you need to do is select all your keyframes by hitting A couple of times, and then hit T, and then choose linear, and then you'll have a constant speed. I'll just change this from the graph editor to the shader editor. Just decrease this window. I'm going to hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to go into solid view. I'm going to skip back to frame 1. I'm going to hit play, and you can see all the particles are rising upwards. And if I go close to the end, hopefully this will loop if I've done it correctly. Yep, loops perfectly. Excellent. I'll just skip back to frame 1. I'm going to go into rendered view. Now we can improve the materials for the particles. Before I do that, I'm just going to hit Ctrl S just in case Blender crashes. So I'll drag my shader editor up. I'm going to select my icosphere object, which is the particle. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go input, and I'm going to choose object info. Shift A, we go converter, and we choose color ramp. On my color ramp, I'm going to select this first flag, and I'm going to change it to an orange color, maybe something around there. And for this second flag, I'm going to change this to maybe a bluish tone, maybe something around there. I'll change the interpolation type from linear to constant, and I'll drag this flag across to, let's say, 0.5. I'll then connect the color socket from the color ramp to the color socket on the emission, and I'll connect the random socket to the factor of the color ramp. If I decrease the strength, you should see the colors coming through a bit more. So we've got blue and orange, so you can add as many flags as you like. I'm just going to keep things simple for this tutorial. I'll change the strength back to 10. I'll just decrease this window. We've got one final step to do to make this look good, and that's post-production using the Compositing tab. So I'm just going to go into solid view. I'm going to go to my render tab here and just ensure that I've got all my render settings set up how I want. I think we previously covered the render settings. I'll just ensure that I've got GPU selected as well. I've got my max sample set to 1024. My light tree is disabled, and I've got reflective and refractive caustics disabled. I'll then hit F12 to render out a preview. When your preview's rendered, I'm just going to close this window here. I'll navigate to my Compositing tab over here. I'm going to enable Use Nodes, and under your End panel, we're going to go to View, Enable Backdrop. We'll also decrease the timeline. I'll then navigate back to the End panel, and I'll click Fit. I'll then hit N to hide the End panel. So I think the first thing we'll do is add a vignette. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go Mask, and I'll choose Ellipse Mask. I'll increase the size on the X to round about there, just so it touches the edges, and I'll increase the size on the Y until it just touches the edges to around about there. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go Color, we'll choose Mix, and we'll choose Mix Color, and I'll pop that in between the render layers and the composite. I'm going to plug the image into socket B, and socket A, I'm going to set this to black. I'll then plug this ellipse mask into the factor of the Mix Color node. Now we just need to blur that factor, so I'll hit Shift A, we're going to go Filter, Blur, and we choose Blur. I'm going to change this from Gaussian to Fast Gaussian, and I'll plug that in between the ellipse mask and the factor of the Mix Color node. I'm going to change the size to, let's say, 250. Okay, we've got a nice vignette there. I think we need to add a bit of glare to this, so maybe we'll go for a fog glow. I'll hit Shift A, we'll choose Filter, and we'll choose Glare, and I'll pop that in between the render layers and the Mix Color node. I'm going to change it from Streaks to Fog Glow. I think we need to add some streaks, so I'm going to take this Glare node, I'm going to hit Shift D, and I'll pop that in between there. I'm going to change it from Fog Glow to Streaks. I'm going to change the fade to 0.93. I'll also decrease the strength to, let's say, 0.25. I'll expand the highlights option, and I'm going to change the threshold to 5. And maybe I can increase the color modulation to, let's say, 0.333. The length of the streaks is a bit too long, so I'm going to reduce the fade to, let's say, 0.92. I'll just box select these two nodes here. I'm going to hit G, just bring these across over to here. I'll then select this glare node. I'm going to hit Control Shift D, and that will duplicate the node whilst maintaining a connection to the previous node. I'll then hold down Control, left click, and drag across this noodle to disconnect that from the node tree. I'll then connect the image socket from this glare node into socket B of the Mix Color node. I'll then change the streak angle to 45 degrees, and I'll reduce the fade on this one to, let's say, 0.875. We now need to blend these two together. So I'm going to take this Mix Color node, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop that in there. I'll pop this glare node into socket B. I'll then connect this image socket into socket A. I'll then change the mix type to lighten, and I give a factor of 1. So now We've got long streaks for the 90-degree angles, and we've got shorter streaks for the 45-degree angles. If this effect is a bit strong, all we have to do is take this mix color node. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop it in between there. I'll then take this noodle from socket A and plug it into socket B. We'll then take the original image and plug it into socket A. So now all we have to do is adjust this factor to blend in the effect. So I'm going to set this to, let's say, 0.5. I think that's a good median point. Okay, that's the compositing complete. So I'm just going to go to my layout tab up here. And if you remember where we've got 3 nebulas, I'm going to select the middle nebula, and that is 20 meters away from the camera. So if I select my camera, I'll hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to go into rendered view. I'll then select the camera data tab down here. I'm going to enable depth of field. I'm going to set the focal distance to 20 meters. I'll increase the blades to 16, and I'm going to decrease the f-stop to 0.7. Now we should have depth of field with these particles. If you reduce this number, you're going to have a larger depth of field, so more things are going to be out of focus. If we increase this number, more things are going to be in focus. So I'm just going to set this to 0.5. I think this scene would benefit from some motion blur as well for the particles. So I'm going to navigate to my render tab. So I'll scroll down until I see motion blur. I'll enable motion blur. I'll expand these options. And the correct formula for motion blur is you take your frame rate and you double it, and that will give you your shutter speed. I'm running at 30 FPS, which means I need a shutter speed of 0.6. because 6 is double to 30. If you're running at 25 frames per second, then your shutter speed should be set to 0.5 because 50 is double the number of 25. So if you stick to that formula, you'll have your correct motion blur. I'll then scroll up. I'm going to navigate to the output tab over here. Go to output, select the file location where you want to save your image sequence. I'm going to select a file called like and subscribe. I'll then click accept. Choose a file format of your choosing. If you're going to go with PNG, which is a lossless format, go for PNG. 8-bit or 16-bit's fine with RGB, but for me, I'm going to choose a file format of OpenEXR with a codec of DWAA lossy, and that will reduce my file size whilst increasing dynamic range for post-production. Before you render, I'm just going to select my render tab. You can select your icosphere, and then we can change the color of our particles. Try and ensure that your palette remains a complementary color system. So if you look on your color wheel, blue and orange are opposite colours, which is why I've chosen these two colours, because they're complementary. And also you'll see that the colours of the particles are also matching the colour of the nebula backgrounds. And don't forget, we can choose our nebula backgrounds. So we select a nebula background. You can increase or decrease the saturation. We can change the hue to anything that we like. So just manipulate all of your nebulas until you've got something that you like, and then when you're happy with the final result, we just click Ctrl S to save the project, and then it's simply a case of hitting Ctrl F12, and that will render out your image sequence. Join me on Patreon as a free member, and you'll have access to this file alongside other Blender files from previous tutorials. That's the tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.